For over 200 years, the Kalari ruled a huge stretch of space like they owned the stars themselves. They weren't just powerful, they acted like gods. Their ships didn't land on planets like normal visitors. They hovered high above, glowing with soft light, broadcasting voices that sounded like music made of pure calm. To the people below, it felt like peace, like truth, like something holy, but it wasn't peace. It was control. The Kalari didn't invade with armies. They didn't need to. They showed up, spoke in those perfect, soothing tones, and told every species they met the same thing. You are lost. We are your guides. Worship us, and you will be saved. Most worlds gave in without a fight. Who argues with something that feels like a dream? Resistance seemed not just foolish, it felt wrong, like shouting at the sunrise. Humanity at first wasn't even on their radar. Earth was far out on the edge of explored space, still figuring out how to keep its own cities from falling apart. When humans finally built their first ship that could jump between stars, it wasn't sleek or scary. Just a clunky science probe, barely faster than light, sent out to see if anyone was listening. It wasn't meant to challenge anyone, just to say we're here. But the Kalari heard it and they didn't like it. To them, humanity was like a child banging pots in a temple, loud, messy, and disrespectful. They sent a response not with words, but with a show of power. A single Kalari vessel appeared near Mars without warning. It didn't fire weapons. It didn't speak, it just dimmed the sun for 3 full minutes over half the planet by bending light around itself. Then, as suddenly as it came, it vanished, leaving behind a message encoded in every radio frequency on Earth. Kneel, or be unmade. Panic spread fast. World leaders argued behind closed doors. Some wanted to fight. Most knew they couldn't. The Kalari had crushed entire civilizations that were far more advanced than Earth. Fighting back would be like throwing pebbles at a mountain. Within weeks, a global council agreed. Humanity would submit. Ceremonies were planned. Temples to the luminous ones were sketched out. Schools began teaching the Kalari's so-called path of light. It felt like the end of human pride, but also, maybe, the only way to survive. Except one ship said no. It wasn't some shiny new warship built for glory. It was the Dauntless, an old deep space hauler that had spent most of its life dragging broken satellites and mining drones back to port. It had been pulled from retirement, patched up with spare parts and fitted with whatever weapons Earth could scrounge, mostly outdated rail cannons and jury-rigged missile pods. Its crew wasn't made of elite soldiers. They were engineers who refused to install Kalari harmony nodes in their cities, pilots who hated the idea of bowing to aliens, and a few scientists who believed the Kalari's divine signals were just clever tech tricks. Their captain wasn't a hero from the history books. He was a man who'd been kicked out of the space fleet years ago for questioning orders during a border skirmish. People called him reckless, stubborn. But he had one thing no one else seemed to. He didn't believe in gods who demanded worship at gunpoint. When the day came for Earth's official surrender, the day every nation would broadcast their acceptance of Kalari rule, the Dauntless was supposed to be docked, silent like all other ships. Instead, it powered up in the dead of night, slipped past orbital patrols and jumped into open space, just as the Kalari delegation arrived in high orbit. The aliens came in a vessel shaped like a blooming flower, glowing with that same calm light. Their broadcast began immediately, a harmonic tone so beautiful it made people on the ground weep with relief. It was supposed to be the moment humanity joined the enlightened, but then cutting through that perfect sound like a knife through silk came raw, ugly noise. Static. Not music. Not harmony. Just pure, unfiltered radio static. Loud, chaotic, and human. The Dauntless had aimed its main comms array straight at the Kalari ship and blasted it with every frequency it could generate. The effect was instant. The glowing light flickered. The harmonic tone stuttered, then broke into distortion. For the first time in centuries, a Kalari vessel looked confused. On Earth, millions watching the broadcast saw the light above them flicker like a dying bulb. The soothing voice turned into a screech, then silence. People froze. Some screamed. Others just stared at the sky, hearts pounding, not sure if they'd witnessed a miracle or a disaster. The Kalari recovered quickly. Within minutes, their ship stabilized and the broadcast resumed. But something had changed. The tone wasn't as smooth. The light wasn't as steady. And for the first time, their message carried a new word: blasphemy. They didn't attack the Dauntless right away. That wasn't their way. Gods don't chase flies. But they marked it. In their records, in their networks across every world they ruled, one name spread like a warning: the blasphemer. Back on Earth, governments were furious. They called the Dauntless a rogue element, a threat to peace. They ordered it to stand down, to return and face trial. But the ship was already gone, jumping into the dark between stars, vanishing before the Kalari could lock onto its signal. Aboard the Dauntless, the crew sat in stunned silence. No cheers, no victory speeches. Just the hum of engines and the weight of what they'd done. They hadn't fired a single weapon. They hadn't destroyed anything. But they'd done something far more dangerous. They'd shown the galaxy that the gods could be interrupted, and that more than any bomb scared the Kalari, because once you realize a god can be wrong, you start wondering if it's a god at all. Now the Dauntless was alone, hunted, with no home to return to and no allies in the void. But they had one thing the Kalari didn't understand. Humans don't need to be right to keep fighting. They just need to believe it's worth trying. And out there in the cold dark, that belief was all they had. The Dauntless wasn't built for war. It was built for hauling scrap, fixing broken satellites, and sometimes rescuing stranded miners from icy asteroids. Its hull was patched in a dozen places. Its engines groaned like an old man climbing stairs, and half the lights in the corridors flickered unless you smacked the panel just right. But now it was the only human ship in known space that hadn't bowed its head, and that made it a target. After that broadcast, the static blast that cut through the Kalari's divine message, the ship jumped blind. No coordinates, no plan, just a desperate leap into the unknown. They came out near the edge of a dead star system, where the planets were frozen rocks and the silence was so deep it felt like the universe had forgotten them. For 3 days, they didn't speak much, just checked systems, rationed food, and watched the long-range scanners like hawks. They knew the Kalari would come. Not right away, gods don't chase. But eventually they'd send hunters, not to destroy the Dauntless, but to make an example of it, to show every species in their empire what happens when you insult the divine. The crew wasn't made of soldiers. One had been a schoolteacher before signing up. Another fixed fusion reactors for a living. The youngest had never even left Earth's orbit until 2 weeks ago. But they all shared one thing. They couldn't live in a world where truth had to kneel. Food ran low. Oxygen recyclers coughed and sputtered. One of the backup thrusters failed during a minor course correction, and it took 2 sleepless nights to jury-rig a fix using parts from a broken comms dish. Morale wasn't high, but it wasn't broken either. There was a quiet kind of stubbornness in the way they worked, like they were proving something not just to the Kalari, but to themselves. Then, a signal. Not from Earth. Earth had gone silent, probably under strict Kalari supervision. This was a faint distress ping from a derelict freighter drifting near a gas giant's rings. It shouldn't have been there. Human ships weren't allowed out this far anymore. But the ping kept repeating, weak but steady. The captain didn't hesitate. "We check it out," some argued. "It could be a trap. Or it's nothing but ghosts. We don't have fuel to waste," but the captain just said, "If it's one of ours, we don't leave them behind. That's not who we are." They approached slowly, shields up, weapons hot, though their weapons were barely more than loud noises compared to Kalari tech. The freighter was dark, hull cracked from micrometeorites, solar panels torn away, but inside they found 2 survivors, shivering, dehydrated, but alive. They'd been hauling medical supplies to a colony when Kalari patrols ordered all civilian traffic grounded. They got lost, ran out of power. One of them, a wiry engineer with grease-stained hands, handed over a data chip before he even drank water. "You're the Dauntless, aren't you?" he whispered. "We heard. What you did." He didn't say thank you. He didn't need to. His eyes said it all. On that chip was something unexpected, not just logs, but intercepted Kalari comms. The engineer had been tinkering with old military scanners, trying to listen in on patrol routes. And he'd caught something strange. The Kalari didn't just broadcast their divine voice from ships. They used relay stations, orbital spires linked together across the galaxy. And those spires didn't just send signals, they synchronized something. Like a heartbeat, like a shared mind. The crew gathered in the mess hall, the only room big enough for everyone. The lights buzzed. Coffee was cold, but no one cared. They played the recordings over and over. At first, it sounded like more of the same harmonic nonsense, but then slowed down. Filtered through old decryption software, patterns emerged. Rhythms, codes, commands disguised as blessings. They're not gods. Someone said quietly. They're broadcasting a lie, and the whole empire runs on it. That changed everything. If the Kalari's power came from belief, if their control depended on that perfect, unbroken signal, then breaking it wasn't just rebellion, it was liberation. But how? The spires were heavily guarded. The central one, the source of it all, orbited the Kalari homeworld, a place no human ship had ever returned from. The captain stared at the star map for hours. Then he said, "We don't need to destroy the whole system, just one node, the main one. If we can get close enough, maybe we can jam it, or overload it, or plant a virus in their network." It sounded impossible, suicidal even. But then again, so was blasting static at a god. Over the next few weeks, the Dauntless became a ghost. It hid in the shadow of comets, powered down to near-zero emissions, drifted through asteroid fields like space junk. They scavenged parts from dead satellites, traded spare oxygen with a smuggler who didn't ask questions, and even reprogrammed a broken drone to mimic Kalari sensor signatures, just enough to confuse patrols for a few precious seconds. They also trained. Not with guns, but with knowledge. The engineer from the freighter taught them how Kalari energy shields pulsed in rhythm with their broadcasts. The teacher-turned-crew member studied their language patterns, looking for gaps in their divine logic. Everyone had a role. Even the youngest crew member, who turned out to have a knack for hacking old navigation systems, found a way to mask their warp signature by syncing it to solar flares. They weren't heroes. They were just people, tired, scared, running on coffee and hope. But they were learning how to fight smarter, not harder. Then came the day they spotted a Kalari patrol up close. Not a warship, just a small scout vessel scanning a mining outpost. The crew held their breath. If they moved, they'd be seen. If they stayed, the scout might drift closer. But instead of hiding, the captain did something unexpected. He sent out a fake distress call, in broken Kalari harmonic tones they'd pieced together from recordings. The message, a penitent vessel lost seeking guidance. It was a gamble, a huge one. If the Kalari believed it, they might ignore them as just another broken soul seeking salvation. If they didn't, well, they'd find out fast. The scout paused, hovered. Then, after a long silence, it broadcast back, "Align with the light. You will be saved." And it moved on. The crew exhaled like they'd been holding their breath for weeks. That's when they knew. They could pretend. They could wear the mask of obedience long enough to get close. The plan started to take shape. They'd pose as a damaged Kalari-aligned ship, begging for sanctuary near the central spire. Once inside the perimeter, they'd deploy a data spike, a virus built from human noise, chaos, and raw truth, designed to flood the network with contradictions, static, questions, doubt. It wouldn't destroy the spire. But it might make the gods stutter, and in a system built on perfect certainty, even one stutter could bring everything down. As the Dauntless limped toward the heart of enemy space, patched, quiet, and full of nervous energy, no one talked about glory. No one dreamed of medals or history books. They just kept checking the engines, testing the virus code, and watching the stars ahead, knowing that soon they'd face the thing the whole galaxy feared. But they also knew something the Kalari had forgotten. Humans have always been good at breaking things that pretend to be unbreakable. The Ashen Belt wasn't a place anyone went by choice. It was a graveyard of shattered planets, twisted metal, and dust that hadn't settled in 1,000 years. Old war debris floated like bones in the dark. Broken hulls, dead satellites, the rusted skeletons of ships that had fought and lost long before humans even reached the stars. But for the Dauntless, it was perfect. No patrols, no signals, just silence and shadows. They'd been running for months now. Every jump drained their fuel. Every repair used up another spare part they couldn't replace. The crew moved slower these days, not from laziness but from exhaustion. They slept in shifts, ate cold rations, and spoke in low voices like the walls might be listening. but their eyes stayed sharp. Because they knew this was the last stretch before the real test. Their target wasn't just any spire. It was the Nexus, the central relay that tied the entire Kalari network together. If their theory was right, it wasn't just broadcasting harmony. It was the brain of the whole system. Shut it down, even for a few minutes, and the illusion of godhood would crack across 1,000 worlds. But getting close meant crossing the Ashen Belt without being seen, and the Kalari had eyes everywhere, even here. One night, while the ship drifted behind the shadow of a dead moon, the comms officer picked up a faint ping. Not Kalari, not human, something else. A repeating signal in a language no one recognized, but it wasn't random. It had rhythm, pattern, like a heartbeat calling for help. They debated ignoring it. They couldn't afford distractions. But the captain listened to the sound for a long time, then said, "If it's alive, it's not alone out here by accident." They followed the signal to a wreck half buried in asteroid rock. Inside, they found a single survivor. Not human, not Kalari, but from a species the Kalari had absorbed decades ago. Thin, gray-skinned, with large, dark eyes that held centuries of quiet suffering. They couldn't speak standard, but they understood it. And when they saw the Dauntless patch on a crew member's jacket, they touched it gently, then pointed to the sky toward Kalari space. Through gestures, drawings, and broken translations, they shared something vital. The Nexus Spire wasn't just guarded by ships. It was protected by belief. Kalari vessels wouldn't fire on anything that broadcast the right harmonic code, even if it looked wrong. Their entire system trusted the signal more than their eyes. That changed everything. Back on the Dauntless, the crew worked non-stop. They took the harmonic codes they'd recorded, layered them with fake distress signatures, and wrapped it all in a loop that sounded like a damaged but faithful vessel begging for sanctuary. They even painted over human markings with reflective foil to mimic Kalari hull patterns. It wouldn't fool a close inspection, but maybe they wouldn't need one. The real weapon wasn't on the ship. It was in a small shielded pod no bigger than a toolbox. Inside was the virus, a program built from everything the Kalari hated: human static, dissonant music, raw data from Earth's history, wars, art, arguments, laughter, grief. All the messy, chaotic truth of what it meant to be alive without pretending to be perfect. The idea was simple: flood the Nexus with noise it couldn't harmonize. Make it choke on reality, but there was a problem. To upload the virus, someone had to get inside the spire. Not just close, inside. Volunteers stepped forward immediately. Not because they wanted to die, but because someone had to do it. In the end, it came down to two: the captain and the linguist who'd spent months decoding Kalari signals. She knew their language better than anyone. He knew when to break the rules, they argued quietly. Not with anger, but with the kind of care that comes when you know you might not see each other again. "You're the only one who can talk your way past their systems," he said. "I'm the one who got us into this mess. I'll finish it." She didn't win the argument, but she made him promise if it went wrong, he'd get out. No heroics, just survival. The day they left the Ashen Belt, the ship felt heavier. Not from gravity, from silence. No one joked. No one played music. Even the hum of the engine sounded like a prayer. They approached the outer edge of Kalari space like thieves in the night. The fake signal played on loop. Their hulls shimmered with borrowed light. For hours, nothing happened. Then a response. A calm musical tone welcoming the lost child back to the light. A path opened. A corridor of empty space, flanked by silent warships that didn't move, didn't scan, didn't question. It was working. As they drifted closer to the spire, a towering structure of crystal and light spinning slowly against the stars, the crew held their breath. One wrong move, one glitch in the signal, and it would all end in fire. Inside the boarding pod, the captain and the linguist checked their gear for the 10th time. No weapons. Just tools, the virus pod, and a small recorder. "If we don't make it back," the captain said, "someone needs to know what really happened here." The pod detached. It floated toward the spire like a leaf on a calm river. The Kalari didn't stop it. To them, it was just another piece of their perfect machine returning home. But as the pod docked, a warning light blinked red on the linguist's wristband. The harmonic signal was drifting. Something was off. "They're scanning us," she whispered. The captain didn't panic. He just nodded. Then we moved faster. They stepped out into the spire, not into a temple, but into a cold, sterile corridor lined with humming machines. No priests. No worshippers. Just endless rows of servers pulsing with soft blue light. The gods weren't beings. They were code. A self-sustaining network that had long forgotten it was built by someone else. The linguist worked fast, plugging into a terminal, whispering commands in broken Kalari syntax. The captain stood guard, heart pounding, listening for footsteps that never came, because there was no one to come. And then, just as the upload began, the lights flickered, not from their doing. From outside, the Dauntless was under attack. Kalari warships, finally suspicious, had broken formation. They weren't firing to destroy. They were trying to disable, to capture the blasphemers alive. But the old hauler wasn't going down easy. It twisted through fire, shields flaring, buying every second it could. Inside the spire, alarms stayed silent. The system didn't understand what was happening. It only knew the signal was still playing. So it waited. Trusted, believed. The upload hit 70%, then 85%, then 99%, and then complete silence. The lights in the spire went dark. Not all at once. One by one, like candles being blown out across a vast hall. Across the sector, every Kalari ship froze. Their glowing auras dimmed. Their voices cut off mid-sentence. On 1,000 worlds, enslaved people looked up and heard something they hadn't heard in generations. Nothing. Just the wind. Just their own thoughts. The captain grabbed the linguist's arm. Time to go. They ran, not as heroes but as survivors, back to the pod. Back to the ship that had given them this one impossible chance. Behind them, the spire didn't explode. It just stopped, like a dream ending at dawn, and in that silence something new began. The moment the Nexus spire went dark, the universe seemed to hold its breath. Inside the boarding pod, the captain and the linguist didn't cheer. They didn't even speak. They just stared at each other in the dim emergency lighting, sweat on their brows, hands shaking. Not from fear now, but from the weight of what they'd just done. Outside the small viewport, the spire hung motionless against the stars, its once glowing surface now dull and lifeless, like a candle snuffed out in a silent room, but there was no time to process it. The Dauntless was still fighting. As they launched the pod back toward the ship, Kalari warships swarmed like angry hornets. But something was wrong with them. Their movements were jerky. Their formations broke apart. One ship fired its main weapon, but missed by miles, as if its targeting system had forgotten how to aim. Another drifted sideways, engines sputtering, lights flickering like a confused animal. The harmony was gone, and without it the Kalari were lost. The Dauntless wasn't in great shape either. Its left engine was spitting sparks. 2 shield generators were offline, and smoke curled from a panel near the bridge. But it was still flying, still fighting. And when the pod docked with a hard clang, the crew didn't wait. They pulled the 2 inside and slammed the hatch shut. "Go," the captain yelled over the comms. The pilot didn't need to be told twice. The ship twisted hard to starboard, diving into the shadow of a nearby debris field just as a Kalari energy beam sliced through the space where they'd been. The hull groaned under the strain, but they made it, vanishing into the maze of broken metal and dust. For a few minutes, there was only the sound of breathing and the low hum of failing systems. Then someone whispered, "Did it work?" The linguist pulled up a data feed on a cracked screen. Across the sector, Kalari signals were dropping off the map one by one. Not destroyed, just silent. On colony worlds, long-range scanners picked up something new. Voices. Real ones. Not harmonic chants, but shouting, crying, singing. People were waking up, but celebration would have to wait. The Dauntless was bleeding fuel, and its main reactor was overheating. They needed to jump, but the navigation system was glitching from the battle damage. One of the younger crew members, the one who'd never left Earth before all this, crawled into the access tunnel behind the bridge with a toolkit and a flashlight. "I can reroute power through the old comms array," they said, voice steady despite the shaking hands. "It'll give us one clean jump. Maybe." While they worked, the captain stood at the observation window watching the spire drift farther away. He thought about all the worlds now free from that perfect, suffocating lie. But he also knew freedom doesn't come quietly. The Kalari wouldn't just vanish. Their empire might be broken, but broken things can still be dangerous. Sure enough, as the ship powered up for its jump, a single Kailari vessel broke from the chaos. Not firing, not chasing, just watching. It hovered in the distance like a ghost, its lights dim but steady. Then slowly it turned and flew away, not toward the spire but deeper into their own territory. Maybe to report, maybe to regroup, maybe to start a war among themselves. The Dauntless jumped just as the reactor alarm started beeping again. They came out near a dying red star, far from any known system. No patrols, no signals. Just the endless dark and the soft crackle of cosmic background noise. For the first time in months, they were truly alone. Repairs began immediately, not because they had a plan, but because stopping felt like giving up. They patched hull breaches with sealant foam, rerouted coolant lines using spare tubing, and shared the last of the real coffee, brewed from beans someone had hidden in their locker for emergencies. No one mentioned that this might be the last cup any of them ever had. Later, in the mess hall, the linguist played a recording they'd made during the upload. It wasn't music. It was the sound of the virus flooding the Nexus. Human voices layered over static. Children laughing, protest chants, a violin playing off-key, a grandmother telling a story in a language no alien would understand. It was messy, imperfect, alive. That's what broke them, someone said softly. Not weapons, just us, but the mood wasn't triumphant. It was tired. Heavy. They'd won a battle, maybe even changed the galaxy, but they were stranded, damaged, and Earth was still under Kailari watch. They had no way to contact home. No way to know if anyone even knew what they'd done. One crew member stared at a photo on their tablet, a family standing in a sunlit garden, smiling like the world wasn't ending. "Do you think they're okay?" they asked, voice barely above a whisper. No one answered. Because no one knew, days passed. The ship limped along on backup power. Food ran low. Hope ran lower. But they kept working. Not because they believed they'd be rescued, but because quitting would mean the Kailari were right, that humans were small, temporary, meaningless. Then one morning, the long-range scanner pinged, not a warship, not a distress call, just a faint repeating signal, human-made. Old encryption, pre-invasion protocol. It was coming from a hidden relay station near the edge of Sol system. Someone on Earth was still fighting, still listening. The crew gathered on the bridge, eyes wide, hearts pounding. It wasn't a rescue, but it was a thread, a connection. Proof they weren't forgotten. The captain looked at his crew, exhausted, bruised, but still standing, and made a decision. We're not done yet. They spent the next week nursing the engines back to life, siphoning power from non-essential systems, even cannibalizing the pod they'd used to board the spire. Every bolt tightened, every wire checked twice. They weren't heading home, not yet, but they were heading toward something, toward the fight that was still happening. As the Dauntless powered up for its next jump, the red star behind them faded into the black. Ahead lay danger, uncertainty, maybe even death, but also purpose, because the gods were silent now. And in that silence, human voices, rough, real, and stubborn, were finally being heard. 2 years after the silence fell over the Kailari network, no one called them gods anymore. What happened next wasn't a clean victory. It wasn't parades and peace treaties. It was messy, loud, and painfully human, just like the signal that started it all. Without the harmonic broadcasts holding their empire together, the Kailari fractured. Some ships turned on each other, fighting over who still spoke for the true light. Others simply shut down, their crews lost without the constant guidance of the Nexus. And on 1,000 worlds, people who'd spent generations kneeling finally stood up and demanded answers. Earth didn't get rescued. It freed itself, slowly, quietly, like a plant pushing through cracked concrete. With the Kailari distracted by their own collapse, resistant cells that had gone underground re-emerged. They didn't use big weapons. They used truth. They played old recordings of the Dauntless's static burst in public squares. They showed children how the divine signals were just code. They reminded everyone gods don't need to threaten. Gods don't need to control, but the Dauntless never saw any of it. After that final jump toward the Sol system, the ship vanished from all known records. Its last confirmed signal came from the edge of a dying star cluster, weak and garbled. It spoke of failing life support, damaged navigation, and a crew too tired to lie. If anyone hears this, the message ended, tell them we made it count. No wreckage was ever found. No bodies recovered. Some said the ship burned up in a solar flare. Others believed it drifted forever, a silent tomb among the stars. But on Earth, in classrooms and shipyards and quiet bars where old spacers gathered, people told a different story. They said the Dauntless didn't die. It just chose to disappear so the legend could grow bigger than any one ship or crew. What mattered wasn't whether they survived. It was what they started. The Kalari hegemony didn't vanish overnight. It crumbled over years, some worlds breaking free peacefully, others through bitter struggle. But the myth of their divinity, that died the moment the spire went dark. Without it, they were just another species, proud, powerful, but flawed. And for the first time, they had to face the people they'd ruled not as gods but as equals. Humanity didn't take over. They didn't try to build their own empire. They were too busy rebuilding their own world, cleaning up the fear, the shame, the damage done by years of forced submission. But they also reached out, not with weapons but with open channels. They shared food with starving colonies, sent engineers to help repair broken grids, offered shelter to refugees, Kalari included, who had nowhere else to go. It wasn't perfect. There were arguments, mistrust, old wounds that wouldn't heal fast, but it was real. And after centuries of living under a lie, real was enough. Back on Earth, a small memorial was built, not in a grand plaza but at Luna Dock, where the Dauntless had last been seen before it disappeared into the unknown. No statues, no speeches, just a simple plaque made of salvaged hull metal etched with one line. They called themselves gods. We called them liars. Tourists sometimes stopped to read it. Kids on school trips would trace the words with their fingers, asking teachers, who were they? And the teachers, no matter their age or background, would always say the same thing. People like us, who refused to look away. The story of the Dauntless became more than history. It became a warning and a promise. A warning that power dressed as truth is still just power, and a promise that even the smallest voice can break the loudest lie, if it's willing to speak. Years later, deep in uncharted space, a salvage crew working near a cold, dead moon picked up a faint energy signature. Buried under ice and rock was a pod, old, human-made, covered in strange markings. Inside they found logs, tools, and a single data chip. When they played it back, it wasn't a distress call. It was a message recorded in calm, tired voices. If you're hearing this, the silence held good. Don't let anyone fill it with new gods. Keep asking questions. Keep making noise. And never ever kneel just because someone tells you to. The chip ended with static. Not the angry kind. The kind that sounds like wind through trees, like rain on a roof, like life going on. The salvage crew didn't sell the pod. They brought it home. And today it sits in a quiet museum on Mars behind glass next to a child's drawing of a ship with wings made of lightning. No one knows for sure if the crew of the Dauntless made it out alive. But in a way it doesn't matter, because their real legacy wasn't survival, it was courage. The kind that doesn't roar. The kind that whispers, this is wrong, and then acts anyway. And in a galaxy full of wonders and terrors, that kind of courage is the rarest thing of all. So when new ships launch from Earth now, they don't fly under banners of conquest or faith. They fly with open comms, ready to listen as much as to speak, ready to help, not to rule. And sometimes when they pass through quiet sectors where the stars shine extra bright, the crew will pause the engines for a moment, turn off all non-essential systems, and just listen, not for gods, but for the sound of silence, earned, not given. And in that silence they remember, we are small, but we are not nothing, and sometimes that's enough to change everything.